I'm going to talk about democracy. I'm a finance professor. Why am I talking about democracy to you? So I'm going to give you the answer. Some of you may know it, but we'll talk about my topic because that's what, they didn't pay me, but that's what they invited me to do today. They bought my book. So, the Bull of Wall Street, power. It's not a word we use in a finance course, but I came across it in my own experiences. And all of a sudden, it was not about those markets I thought about. It was about power, and it shapes what happens. So, power matters. You know, they stand in line, 200 people, to take Jeff Pfeffer's class about paths to power. And it's very ruthless. I was just talking to some students in a social, and they're like, oh, it's so cynical. How could Jeff be, you know, a friend of yours? I'm like, he also wrote Dying for a Paycheck. You know what I mean? Like, he's got this path to power. Anyway, so power matters. What happened here? Why is it not advancing? Uh-oh. So I'm going to use the word governance. I'm going to explain what I mean. I have a whole thing about governance. And just one way to think about governance is the opposite of corruption. So if you think you understand what corruption is, abuse of power, then it's the opposite. Okay. It's where you have accountability, all this good stuff. And so that's where democracy starts being, because it's about power, okay? So power in finance. So, oh my God, I fixed this slide. How did that get here? It's power in finance. So that's my class. I just fixed it this morning, and I changed my slides, I thought. Power in finance, I'm going to give you a little bit. So I just finished teaching that course. By now, it's like a nine-class two-unit course. And I teach it with a lecturer who's kind of we're yin and yang. He's a political scientist who is an investor, and I'm a finance professor who encountered politics. So we talk about capitalism and democracy, not specifically democracy, but it's clear that it's about that because it's about how democracy actually works. And the question is financialization and everybody focusing on what we teach them in finance, the stock price, the earnings, whatever are the financialized metrics. That is what we teach people to focus on right here. So we discuss the interactions of people, corporations, governments, and the sort of financial system is there. So that's a brief sort of what the sessions are about. I dropped the visitors. They keep changing. The order also changes with what the visitors can do because there's a lot of visitors here. I'll show you a couple of them in a second. But that's a topic, so we kind of, it changes. If I have a full course, there's more time to do more stuff. But so these are slightly longer sessions, and we cover all of these with visitors, so we kind of flow with it. We had to do crypto last year for the first time. This year was a little different than last year. We had people from the industry last year, and it was quite a spectacle. A lot of hyping from Andreessen Horowitz, but this year we had a skeptic, so that was more acceptable. Anyway, and we did this responsible capitalism, which I'm going to talk about, because we're about capitalism and democracy, okay? So here are three of the visitors that we had this year. Two of them, one of them came just once last year virtually, and she was at the SEC at the time, and now, COVID is over. She could come in person, but she was so awesome. I wanted to bring that smart blonde to class. And the other one is actually one of my favorite in the middle. Fahmi Kadir is like the gutsiest, amazing investor. She's like short selling for justice or something. I mean, she's just amazing. So she's so good for the students because she's just so honest and so herself and so amazing. So she's one of my favorite. And Tariq Fancy was the first time he came. He was in Bercock. You may have heard the name. He's a kind of whistleblower on sustainable investors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about him because it's very related to our topics, fresh on my mind. We just had an event with him. So what I discovered is the financial system is really distorted. The title of this paper that I wrote, It Takes a Village to Maintain a Dangerous Financial System, comes from the movie Spotlight. It was the same time as the Big Short movie in 2015, and I was basically wrapping up the kind of policy engagement that I engaged in 24/7 for about 6 years at that time. And so now I'm kind of reflecting back on that, post-traumatic from that, whatever. And really. But anyway, so it takes a village, meaning there's a sentence in the movie, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse a child. So this is about enablers, okay? Enablers, Harvey Weinstein, enablers. Cover up. So the enablers of the financial system are obviously all the people who are part of it. So that's easy. They are interacting with things that they get hired to do audits or consulting, or they work there, so they have no incentive to disrupt anything there. Okay, duh, of course. But there are people who are supposed to do stuff for society. They work for nonprofit, even universities. They work for the government. They work for the central bank. So they too enable. It's a kind of bargain, symbiosis. So I want to give you a governance framework, which is, I think, how I help the students kind of think about everything. Always about who has power, what information they have, what constraints they face, what are their incentives. So governance is fundamentally about 3 big words: power, information, and incentives. So that's always how you unpack a situation. So in the business school, in a finance course, we teach how to do this. What does make as much money as possible? This famous 1970 essay, as much money as possible, and I put the qualification while obeying the rules of society as embodied in the law and in ethical customs. So it's like, play by the rules and make as much money as possible. That's what we teach. We operationalize that through, in a finance course, through the stock price, the net present value, in the price, right? Those who took the class remember. And that's what I did for 25 years. In my little bubble, writing some papers, everything seemed fine in that bubble, except that stuff happened, and I by now, unpack what he is saying. The issue is the following. Everything would be fine with what he's saying if all the shareholders agreed, okay, that that's what they want to do. The markets were free and competitive. Later in the same essay, he says, in free competitive markets without deception and fraud. So that's how he talks about playing by the rules of society, free and competitive. Managers don't engage in deception and fraud, so that he takes as given. And the rules of society are there for everybody else. So you got contracts, you got laws, everybody's protected by the rules of society. So you play by the rules of society, everybody's protected, you maximize, make as much money as possible, whatever that means exactly, okay? Accounting profits, stock price, whatever. But what if these assumptions are wrong? What if instead shareholders have other preferences about what you do? Maybe, so some people talk about shareholder welfare versus shareholder, make that one stock price higher. Well, 5 classes later, we teach you to diversify. So now there's common ownership, all this other debate going on about how you own the market, right? I mean, that's what I used to teach. So now what do you want from one stock? What if governments fail to write the rules of society? What then happens to the entire concept of what we're doing? What if the corporations actually help write those rules? Ooh, the plot thickens. What if they cause harm and nothing happens and they get away with it? What then to what we said? In fact, there you go. What if in order to make as much money as possible, they'll hire the lobbyists, they'll break the law, they'll hire the lawyers to cover that up, all of that stuff. Whoa. The whole thing falls apart. The whole logic of what, and that's kind of, oh my God, I was teaching everybody to just do that and everything would work out. That would be your social responsibility, to make as much money as possible. But the reality on the ground. So one of my recent papers, I was asked by a bunch of other people to write a very short essay, 5,000 words on a topic so big, what's gone wrong with capitalism, which presumes that something went wrong, how to fix it, 5,000 words, including the references. So that was pretty daunting. So I'm like, what? so I start going in this essay. I gave you a link to the full, or I'll share the slides. This is a slightly older version somehow. I hope I have everything there. Otherwise, I have it on my memory card. But anyway, they basically looked at dictionary definitions of capitalism. Capitalism is not socialism. Capitalism is about markets and prices and all this kind of stuff, and unpacked what it means. But my conclusion was that in markets and in politics, deception is a tool. And so if you can confuse people about what's going on, that is a way, tobacco companies would make money, or lots climate deniers would deny, et cetera, for years and years. So there are all these dichotomies floating around. This debate is such a muddle and such a mess. You cannot, the markets are great, governments are evil. Governments are the problem, said Ronald Reagan, et cetera. You can't even have corporations, let alone any markets, without functioning legal systems in government. So this whole idea that you have to choose between the government and the market is completely wrong. There's no market where, we're not in a tribe where we're just like, doing little trades. We're in a global market where the law is what you own, what you can protect, what you can go to court when somebody harms your, trademark, whatever. You gotta have a legal system. And we take it for granted that works. But what if it doesn't? It's a problem for the system entirely. So how these rules are written, how they works out down on the ground. The more you peel, the more you realize, oh, I didn't realize this is how it works. And so it's been like an exploration ever since I started figuring this out. Enforcement matters. So the markets and everything else in our lives really depends on having competent governments, not big or small, just competent and effective. Every organization needs to be effective, private sector, public sector, so everybody can get ineffective or bloated or corrupt or something, So I make a complete parallel between the government sector and the government, non-profit, for-profit, organizations. So here's Mitch McConnell, just one example. Don't get involved with voting rights, but do send the checks. Oops, I didn't mean the checks. So just stay quiet about these political debates. You're just a corporation, make money, that's it. Okay? But I do like your donations, that's free speech. So you see the muddle, okay? You see the ridiculousness of it, okay? So, democracy. Okay, do we love democracy? Do we care about democracy? Democracy is about balancing power. Democracy is about, compromises and different views and somehow finding society's, objectives of social, collective decision. And informed debate is a piece of it. And you need a system that works, the voting, the different representative bodies, the judiciary, or the whole thing that somehow would hold together. It's not trivial. A lot of democracies are in crisis right now, so we have this dual crisis. But what my thesis is that they are related. That part of what's ailing democracy is the sort of overwhelming forces of capitalism, of that making as much money as possible, and by taking over democracy. So what if powerful people don't actually like democracy? I mean, if I had to choose one person, I'd say Peter Thiel doesn't like democracy. It's just not his thing. He likes to win, 0-1, he likes power, plain and simple. And some sectors, banking is included, and even the internet, have a fundamental conflict with the machinery of democracy, with how it works, how people find out stuff, financial services. There are different sectors that you can look at where the way they work kind of clashes them with democracy because they kind of need a framework, and the democracy is not able to provide that structure for them to actually work for us, for the system. So rules is a key word because people talk, somehow laws, rule of law we love, but regulation we hate. So there are all kinds of, associations with words, okay? But I call rules everything, okay? So we accept that we need rules, okay? And rules are made everywhere. So the government makes rules, governments, plural. There's different governments, different states, different, federal, you got governments all over the place, the world, and even a nation, like here, local, state, federal. And all kinds of things that they make have different words associated with them. Could be an international law, could be, human rights, whatever. And then there are a lot of rules, different names that are made in the private sector. So when you go on Facebook, the government can't control your speech, but Zuckerberg can. So he makes the rule. He has a Supreme Court. Are you up? Are you down? Can you say this or that? Now Elon Musk and Twitter, etc. That's rules in the private sector. So in the private sector, you have all of those rules that are basically they come from either contracts, effectively, with the contract will say, you have to go to mandatory arbitration or, whatever. Terms of service, all of that we agree to all the time. Agree. Track my data, whatever, okay? So it's a contract, supposedly, between, we're negotiating this thing, or maybe not. It's a rule they decided. We agreed, willingly or not. We didn't have that much choice. So, some contracts like that are unconscionable or adhesive or whatever. So it becomes an issue of power again, okay? But these are rules. They're just in the private sector. You violated this rule, the honor code of Stanford, whatever. The organization made it, or a group of organizations or whatever, and they try to enforce it. So here's the thing. Enforcement matters. You can write any rule you want. You can say any mission statement you want. But what does it mean? Does it have any teeth? Nice words, So I now use, I talk about speed limits or, rules for aviation, but sports, everybody understands sports, and I'll show you my speaker who kind of brings this sports analogy. Sports is good because it's also competitive, and the two teams, they want the rules. So, people talk like Donald Trump came in and said, we're going to take down half the rules. Well, it's not about a number. The book of football rules is like thick. So, number of rules, that doesn't make even sense. What's the rule? Can you touch this person that way or that way? What's a foul? Whatever. So here is our favorite team in this area. I think that hand, I was going to put in Draymond Green, but he's not in this picture. Maybe his hand there behind, because he's arguing. So, okay, there's a rule. The referee said it's a foul, whatever. So they have a process to contest whatever. But there's a rule, And, the game doesn't work without that, without referees. Free game, okay? So the rules are useless without enforcement. So this is a cartoon. These rules will change how we get around them. So everybody wants to get around the rules. It is stay, in just the right side of the rules. So, we call it regulatory arbitrage. It's a fancy word for that. Finding ways to kind of use different words. So it's not a derivative, it's a swap. It's not insurance, it's, something else because the regulation is different or whatever. So Tariq Fancy, who I mentioned, was here in this auditorium, sitting right here. We had different chairs, with Bethany McLean, who you may have heard of Enron, and she now comes every year to the accounting course, so that I'm happy about that. I can't invite her to my class anymore, but she comes to moderate frequently because she likes to come from Chicago to California in the winter. So if I say, can you come moderate with the judge or with Tariq Fancy, she gets on a plane and comes here. So she was here just a few weeks ago and interviewed Tariq Fancy, who resigned from BlackRock as a chief investment officer on sustainability. And here are some of the nuggets from what he said. So this is all available, the video, a report on it. She asked him at some point, so what would you say to people who say the government is intervening in free market? Oh, that got him riled up a little bit. And he said, that's a huge hoax, the whole concept of free market. Because I'll stop anybody who uses that term, which is very common where we hang out, and say, what do you actually mean by free market? You associate the word freedom with the word market. So freedom, there's freedoms that you want somebody to protect. There's a freedom to harm somebody else, then they don't have freedom. So what do you mean by free market? Exactly. And he says, it doesn't make any sense to say the government is intervening in free market, just the same as it doesn't make sense to say the NBA is intervening in the free game of basketball. Have the game and have the rules of the game. So the NBA is setting the three-point line someplace, and it's intervening in the free game? That doesn't make sense, okay? There's a game, and the game has a rule. There's a market. Market has rule. No rules, no market, etc. No rules, no game. The reflexing anti-regulation push has to be replaced with a more intelligent understanding of the fact that systemic solutions are going to require the power of the government. So I'm surrounded with all do good impact investing, ESG, and it's only going to take you so far. And I start with some students in some other class with, slavery of kids in Africa to produce chocolate. They agreed not to have child labor. Now, of course, the people are poor, and the parents may be sending them and all of that, but they didn't, because everybody wants cheap chocolate. Okay, so is it going to be a rule that they all commit to, or somebody's going to have expensive chocolate because they're ensuring that there are no children working on the supply chain or pay more, whatever. So we can't commit together to a set of rules. That's why we agreed that there will be a speed limit or the rules against driving under the influence. We accept that if we break those rules, the policeman would stop us, and we want the other people to be stopped if they drive recklessly in the street. So that's how we can function as a society. And so you see all the narratives going around and all the actual stuff that made ESG so political right now, woke capitalism and all this stuff. So they're saying at BlackRock, don't pay attention to our CEO who says, we want to do business here. And then the states, our red states are saying, you're discriminating against fossil fuel, and we're going to kick you out and take our money out of you and all of that. So this is a crazy debate anyway, okay? So I don't want CEOs to take care of society. In my mind, the reason that we are begging them is because the rest of society doesn't work. So we kind of have to turn to whoever has power to say, please take care of us. So we have to get to the root of why we're here in the first place, that there's some restlessness about what, inequality, other things, climate change, whatever else. So we need good governance, effective governance everywhere. We need to know what's going on. So otherwise, people hide that they cause harm, that they break the rules of society. We need to recognize the power of corporations in the political sphere. There are legal abstract people who can donate to campaigns and can just are strong relative to the government and actually overwhelm the government. They make the government, it becomes self-fulfilling to hate the government because you kind of corrupt it, then it doesn't work. Then you say, see, it doesn't work. See, that's not a good situation to basically make it not work and then complain that it doesn't work. So the devil is in the details. When you look at the details, you see how that plays out. How there are lawyers that are, with the Ellison Herring Lee, the SEC commissioner, I moderated a panel, and it was about, can SEC enforce rules against Elon Musk? So she's like, if we have a powerful person like Elon Musk, he can bring in every lawyer in the country against us. We're just the SEC. How can we, enforce the agreement with him on Twitter, on what he tweets? You know what I mean? Like, he's like, forget you, I'm not going to do it. You force me to do this and that, I don't want to do it. And he doesn't have the babysitter on his Twitter. Okay, So what does it even mean? So we need trusted institution. We need trustworthiness. You need to be able to trust. That's the problem. It's become difficult to trust. And we need to build the trust. So journalism is important. This is an optimistic view by Joseph Pulitzer, that's, who prizes are named after. And here's what he said. There's one way to get a democracy on its feet, and that is by keeping the public informed about what's going on. There is not a crime, there's not a dodge, there is not a trick, there's not a swindle. There's not a vice which does not live by secrecy. Get these things in the open, describe them, attack them, ridicule them in the press, and sooner or later, public opinion will sweep them away. This is a very optimistic view, but it's not quite right, because it's really important to know. But then what? So it's a starting point to know what's going on. It's another thing to actually be able to do something about it. So why am I here? Because there was a financial crisis, which got me shaken up. And I just started wondering, wait a minute, I'm a finance professor. I tell people how wonderful these markets are. I think I'll start my class. I say, look, you can, have people who want to save, people who want to invest. The financial system allows that. You want to spread the risk. Isn't that wonderful? You want to govern through, financial system. Let's now go and value option or price securities or whatever. And so what happened? Why did the system implode? And why did we need bailouts? And what went on? And then as a corporate finance professor who teaches, and ignores banking because they're kind of special and different, I start looking in banking. It's like, oh my God. I mean, that's a crazy world. So if you are not like one of those foreclosed homes, which most of us weren't, so this unemployment, recession, we may have been privileged to not experience it personally, but, we'd read the Wall Street Journal and see that AIG is failing and Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy and the whole system is collapsing and there's a big panic and all of that, and the government springs in and the Fed springs in and bails out and all of this. I'm skipping ahead, but I don't have this in the book that you got because I just found out about it after the book was written. There was a book called Payoff, Why Wall Street Always Wins, by a guy who was around Washington, was actually working with Biden, doesn't have a good view of Biden, but never mind that. He describes conversations during the debate about Dodd-Frank and I think 2010, 11, when he was working with the Senator Kaufman, who was this replacement to Biden when Biden became vice president. And the good thing about Ted Kaufman from Delaware was that he didn't want to run for office, so he was not as concerned with political donations. So anyway, this is what Volcker told Ted Kaufman. Just about whatever anybody proposed, the banks will always bring out this big threat. Credit and growth will suffer. And then he said, it's all bullshit. Now, this summarizes sort of, naked emperors and all kinds of things like that. Bullshit. So, I even took this quote and went to Davos with it when they invited me. And I said, give me 5 minutes, so I'll save my bottom line. And then the rest and what we're going to hear from these bank CEOs and all of that, I'm just quoting Volcker. And if you give me more time, I'll explain. So I don't usually use those words, and he had some other things to say that I don't dare, but anyway. So that's the book that you have. This book was written 10 years ago. It was published in February 2013, and to my horror, 10 years have elapsed. Since then, the copy you have, the softcover is from 2014, February, so 9 years ago. And so we were just teaching. I encountered journalists and staffers in Congress and other people, and I was just becoming this tutor. So this was kind of my tutoring book for the public, for these journalists. So it would take me hours and hours to kind of explain what a balance sheet is and how it works, and what's debt and equity, all this stuff, and starting with mortgages, slowly. So it's you can give it to anybody, lots of footnotes, but the text itself is very accessible, no abbreviation, no jargon. It just takes you through and then explains specific things we could do. And there are very nice blurbs. This is just one of them. It's a big shot in finance. So a lot of the blurbs from Volcker and Ken Arrow and all of that were on the hardcover, not with you. You have kind of the afterwards. Those are gone, the first ones. So there was another thing that came out of the crisis. Everybody started complaining about why nobody went to jail. So in the book, in the Big Short book, Michael Lewis says, at the end, he reflects on how partnerships became corporations when he worked in Wall Street, and it was liar's poker time from the 80s. He's like, oh, when they became corporations, then they, and nobody could see the risk, and nobody could understand it. Then he says at the very epilogue of that, of The Big Short, when he reflects on Liar's Poker, he says the problem was not that Lehman Brothers was allowed to fail, but why it had been allowed to succeed, which is really our book. This is our book. How did we get that it was okay, that it was lawful, but when the movie was made, which was a feature movie, he ended differently. Nobody went to jail, which was more resonating with the public that no executive went to jail. But then they're saying, well, no crimes are committed by these, or you can't prove intent, or whatever. So, but most of it was lawful. So that's the problem, is why it was allowed to happen. So Michael Lewis captured it. The movie, went elsewhere to that anger about nobody went to jail. The fact of the matter is how they handled all the fraud that happened, that also was a problem, in addition to the excessive risk and all this other stuff. There was a lot of fraud in securitization, bad loans, liar's loans, selling investors, pension funds, everybody, securities that were really junk, and getting high rating and all this other stuff. They wrote a check, cost of doing business, made a lot more money. So what happened? Was that justice somehow for all this stuff? That's my interest right now. So 10 years after the crisis, the New York Times had a whole section, 10 years, 10 lessons. I still get it on the weekend in paper, so you can't really see it in the digital, but they left the entire back page empty. And the lesson number 10 was all the executives that went to jail, and then it was like, this page is intentionally blank, white page. So I don't think I kept the thing, but I took a picture of it. So it was just white page with the headline, a list of executives that went to jail. And it was blank entire page of the Sunday section, opinions section, after 9 other lessons. So that people were left a little bit angry about that. So if you talk about an anger that the public feels about something wrong, that demagogues can take all kinds of places, be angry with, woke immigrants, whoever. That's the sort of base anger that is not sure where to focus on, but something's wrong. So the parade continues. So the emperors, naked emperors, they still going. So this is the Emperor's New Clothes story, where, if you call it out, you're stupid or incompetent. Well, I don't believe I am, but I am calling it out. So, but they still say it. So, in the Emperor's New Clothes, the emperor is a little embarrassed when the little kid shouts, the emperor is naked. But these people are not afraid. They keep saying it. So it's pretty amazing. So we're writing, I'm speaking to you in a little break from the bunker of trying to finish a revision of not a revision of the whole book. The book is still relevant as is, 2 additional chapters. So the 2 additional chapters will go over what happened since COVID, all that, and what they did and didn't do, and more of the legal and governance issue. So in 2013, we were going to just explain basic stuff. The basic stuff is still there. I use it for my classes now. And now we're trying to say what happened in the decade and add more context on the governance issues, on the law, all of that. So bottom line of that, we will have 2 chapters. I'm still about to go over the rest of the day trying to wrap it all up, write a preface, etc., with the clock ticking. More on governance, more on law. We dig into Deutsche Bank governance. We dig into a JP Morgan Chase settlement. My editor just told me yesterday, check carefully, because I think they're afraid, to say something. But, we'll see. Jamie Dimon talks to me, so I'll ask him all about that settlement, where he hid all the whistleblowers' complaint. $13 billion popping figure, and everybody called it victory. Stock price went up. Dimon got paid because he settled all these claims. And they brought a challenge, and I call it not truth to power, but power to truth. Giving power to truth, that's what's lacking. We live in a post-truth world. I mean, how do you begin to just be honest about facts, about basic arguments? We can't have hope otherwise. So what to do? So, if I teach students, they're getting depressed, well, the whole thing is not to get depressed, because we actually do have power. You look around and you find it. That's That's all. So I'm not telling everybody, I don't want to show you, a list of, influential women or powerful women. I mean, I was on the Time 100 influential person, and in the gala, the editor of the Times said, this is a list of influential people, but not of powerful people. And that resonated with me, because when I talk to my power and finance class in the last class, and it gets a little personal, I say, I'll just describe to you the power of Jamie Dimon and the power of Anat Admati, okay? So it's not about truth, it's about power. But the power of one is only about anything you want to change. It could be in your life, it could be also for other people, but what would you change? And then what can you do? So we each have a sphere of feasible actions. Sometimes it's not, I bring a whistleblower to my class and he ruined his life. So my students were saying, most surprising thing is how awful it is to whistleblow. So I'm not recommending necessarily ruining your life by whistleblowing. You have to be really strategic about these kinds of things. So what might you be able to do reasonably about whatever it is that you might want to change? And, what then will you do and when? Because you can postpone it. I had another New Yorker cartoon, and it says, Tuesday doesn't work. How about never? Does never work for you? That's a good cartoon, too. So I just pose you that question. Women leader, other leaders, what can we do in this sort of fractured, polarized society to kind of begin to communicate with some basic understanding of something we can call truth, and give that truth power? That's really a way to use those simple words kind of together in a sentence to say, can the truth gain power to get the right outcome somehow? But you have to kind of build it from the truth upward. R.J. Miller was a famous dean of this business school, and he said a lot of very clever things, and one of them is about that change the world thing that is part of the GSB mantra, and I challenge the GSB to say, okay, on whose behalf? Do you just want to have successful people who will donate money to you? Because all organizations have donors or investors or somebody. So, look at organizations that are nonprofit. Look at think tanks that have boards filled with bankers. Look at USC protecting their dean. You look around and all institutions can get corrupted. So it's a problem. So this is from a piece I wrote on democracy. This is when I dared to start talking about democracy. They had a volume, so all the people who work on democracy, they work on voting and on, all these things, but where are the corporations in this discussion? Where is corporate power? Even though they don't vote, they affect outcomes in the politics. So I explained some of these issues, and I said at the end, because I'm an educator, I say education is key. But I think it's really at all levels. Now, I don't reach to the high school level, but I know some people do. So in Stanford now has civic engagement, all this, democracy promotion. It's complicated. Democracy is very complicated because you can have stupid voters, right? Et cetera. So Plato was against democracy. So it's complicated how we get good decisions out of government. In my class, I have sometimes students from like Singapore or something like that. So they say, well, maybe we're not a full democracy, but we have an accountable government. We pay high salaries to our, public sector employees, pegged to the private sector salaries. Maybe we don't pay anybody, then they have to, be timid against the private sector. So I have an initiative. The director of my initiative is right here, a competitor's MBA, 1990, Lisa Simpson, and it's called the CASI, Corporation Society Initiative, where the sort of the little initiative that could, which, because we're very little. But it's built on students is really what it is, because I started my coming back from policy to GSB. I started by wanting to enrich the faculty because I had experiences that were outside my silo, and I wanted to break silos for faculty. So I got a little budget from John Levin after bugging him for a while to kind of bring visitors to campus, but then the faculty wouldn't engage with them. So I was going to close that because they're just so focused on their own career concerns and on their own narrow silos, and I couldn't get their attention to look beyond. But then the students started looking for me. And then I was like, okay, you know what? Forget the faculty. I'm going to work with the students. So now CASI is powered, and I can fill even CEMEX once a year, like I did for this event. otherwise thrown in the classroom, to kind of talk about PG&E and climate risk, to talk about labor unions. The students are hungry for that. They're like, oh, why did they tell us labor unions are just a problem for managers and they're not giving us the full picture? They wanted to talk to union leaders to understand what it is that's going on. So the students are hungry, but the GSB is very hard to change. So John Levin, good guy, but it's a hard place to change, and the students keep asking for change, and what I tell the students is, the place is going to wait you out. So, we need your longevity as alums to press the GSB. If the GSB is going to take seriously what they say about, business, government, and society, we have to tackle these issues. We have to look at the mirror, ask ourselves, are we part of the problem? And decide that we are actually, part of this issue, and maybe some of what we taught our students, without them even realizing it, ended up causing harm. So that's it. So this, in your book, my book, next year there is a bookmark, so we can afford those. And it has a website, so you can go to the website. Lisa made it more. She comes from the media sector, where she worked at the start of the internet. What was it? Katie Couric said back in what is the internet? What is email? She said in the 80s. I think if I will not see my family anymore. She said this is back in 92, and she was a producer there anyway. So she's my one full-time sidekick, and we have a half-time and student volunteers who just changed leadership as we speak now. So we just had a social yesterday, a new team coming. Every year we have to work with the volunteers, whatever they can do, and then they leave in the winter again. So, but they power. They bring their classmates. They do small group dinners. That's what we can do. We can do more, but, if they give us resources. Thank you. Oh, I'll take questions if there's time. I have time till 11. When I talk, I just don't look at the clock, but Lisa made me take down like my 150 slides so I can finish.
My name is Yuko Takano. I'm class of 05.
Yeah.
I've been a portfolio manager in sustainable finance for about 5 to 6 years now. I've created sustainable products for my firm. We try to approach sustainable finance in a holistic approach. We do active management, and we do a lot of engagement. But as you know, probably more than me, the whole industry has faced issues of greenwashing and so on and so forth. So where do you think this will end up? Is it just a really fancy marketing exercise, or is sustainable finance here to stay?
So yesterday in the marketplace, I was just communicating with the reporters. So yesterday the marketplace had a story about the law in California about disclosure, and it was about greenwashing. So there's a California senator who got really upset about greenwashing and wants California to enact disclosure requirements that include, all the scopes. Scope 3 is kind of down the supply chain, what your emissions. And I was actually coming at the end of that story to say, that if you step back from the greenwashing, it's basically what Tariq is saying. And he wrote, Tariq Fancy wrote this thing called The Secret Diary of a Sustainable Investor. It was in 3 parts, and then he wrote an epilogue 4th. And he just came to this realization, coming to do this exact thing, that it's a distraction. So he feels like, it allows people to say, I'm doing something about climate change, where if it's going to be, even if it's going to be about disclosures, and even if it's going to be about disclosures that are audited or we can trust, because right now it's kind of a mess in terms of, who produces the numbers, who audits the numbers. So we, and I have accounting colleagues and others who are, trying to create standards and stuff about carbon markets and all kinds of things like that. The problem is, in the end, even if we know stuff, so even campaign contributions, so we have this, even if we have disclosures, a lot of them are in the dark, so we don't. But then what are we going to do with that information? So it doesn't actually change behavior. So what I said in the marketplace little clip was, when California enacted emission standards, that made a difference. Because the California standards, you're not going to produce cars just for California, so that really made a difference. So now California can be a leader, say, because the SEC is going to get killed in the court, and they're being, clobbered, and it's only for public corporations. Most of the stuff is private. This is above $1 billion oil corporations. So it's a bunch of like 5,000, 6,000 corporations affected who have business in California will have to comply. And California is the fourth largest economy. I mean, California is huge. So California can make a difference on this disclosure issue, which would be good relative to alternatives on that issue. The question is, ultimately, what is it going to do for climate change? So that's, you have to step back and ask how to, because I'm into, efficiency, I'm an economist. So, where is good to spend the resources on creating a whole structure? So they were going to envision a whole structure of auditing and checking, because any rule you're going to put in place, you need to enforce, as I said. So now you're going to need to have a whole infrastructure of auditors, and is information good or bad, and what if the auditor is lying? There's a whole layer of enforcement that you need to deal with, the whole structure. So it creates another bureaucracy, it creates another requirement to comply with for the corporations. And, I would examine every requirement if it's useful. I just really, so what Tariq was really saying to the students right here in this audience, in this venue, that, how are we going to actually tackle climate change? I mean, what is it going to happen? So obviously developing alternative energy, obviously these things are really important. So then it's like, okay, build, the Inflation Reduction Act, subsidies, all of that. So now we're going to drive electric cars, but now we need electricity. So now you have to think about that. We're going to have enough electricity for all these electric cars. So I don't know how far they thought about that exactly, or what the source of electricity, et cetera, the batteries. So everything is kind of complicated. Similarly, with the discussion of wildfires, which we all experience here. Okay, so obviously climate change brought to the fore PG&E's negligence of safety. They wanted them to be green, so they neglected the safety. Then climate change came. But part of that is a whole set of other things. Forest management, controlled fires, and zoning. Where are people allowed to live? And then PG&E has to bring them electricity, and then then fires happen. So I think it's, everything, the more you look, the more, if you want to have a big picture. So on sustainable investors, it's useful. It sounds good to do that, but like, divestment, other things, you're not sure what it does. Vivek Ramaswamy is going to come and buy cheap. So now what? In other words, one person divests, another person sees it as an opportunity. So does the cost of funding increase? I mean, I'm a finance person, so what impact do you have if you divest on the real issues? So I think it would be good for all of us to kind of step back and ask what we want as a society ultimately. An investor wants to know something, and then what will they do with that? So I'm kind of unsure on some of these things, and where it will end. Well, I hope not in the muddle that we're in somehow. Yes? Mike, here's Mike.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Pooja Jain. I'm Sloan Fellow, class of 20. Just building up on that question and the response, I operate in the climate and sustainability energy transition space, and I'm an optimist, but also a realist. Yeah. I'm curious about your thoughts on the whole idea of focus on energy transition and all the targets that have been set, yet the realistic issues around permitting policy that will prevent shovels in the ground. I'd love to hear your thoughts around the governance and policy side of things.
This is really hard. You see all of them going to all these COP conferences, wasting a lot of energy in the process, by the way, and to sit around and have a big festival on these issues. So it just shows they recognize it's important. But it's like, okay, what actually comes out? Well, I mean, you got ultimately, you have a major global conflict about, who caused it, who's suffering, who's going to pay, to whom to transition. So you are developed nations battles going on. So it's just politics at the global level is ultimately what it is. And I think we have to recognize that for what it is, because again, truth is, it is what it is. We have to face that. And, I love women I love to talk to women, because usually on average anyway, women can see the bigger picture better or think longer term. So it's like, okay, well, what is the issue? So, okay, so part of the issue on climate change is really that it's a very long-term problem, and we're all short-termists by definition. They talk about the jobs that will be lost, the transition costs in whatever, in some states, in some regions of this country. So that was true with globalization, with automation, all this other stuff. In other words, you could talk about efficiency and growth, but then some people are affected differently than others. And the same is true for climate change. It's like, how can the human species that did affect this problem come to terms with where we are today on it, however misguided we were to pretend it's not there for a while, and now we're kind of recognizing it's there. So what are we going to do now? So we set targets, but we have to be serious about the targets. So I think, everything gets realized, but a little bit slow. And there's just a general tendency, again, the first way to fix these kinds of problems is to recognize them, first of all, because if you pretend they're not there, then... So the tendency, the natural tendency we all have about issues to kick the can down the road is to just not deal with them today. That's why is never good for you. It's kind of a good cartoon. So it's like, okay, well, what can I do today about this problem that would help? So, we all kind of cut the corners in very different ways. But I think it takes giving people, realistic things that they can do. And it's about thinking what the government can do. Basically, what the government decided is it's easier to give subsidies than to tax. And that's because people have a viral, visceral, hate of taxes. So, can we print enough money to subsidize everything and not cause inflation, whatever? Maybe we can just invest our way into alternative energies and capturing carbon and all this other stuff. So I actually, because I care about these things, it's not, again, I'm a finance professor, but I joined the Doer School, so I have another title, just more work at zero time. So I get meetings there and seminars there, and I'm just checking who's around. A sustainability school, the new sustainability school. It's totally work in progress, but they have a big pot of money. So what are they going to do with it? We'll see. Yes.
I have the microphone, so
yes.
There you go. I'm going to just take the power of the microphone.
She's got the power of the microphone.
Power of the microphone. Kristen Jacobson, GSB, MBI 95. I wanted to ask, talk a little bit more about enforcement and how you get there. So I'm in mental health, and we have this amazing law that was passed in 2008. And regulations were finally written in 2014. And then in 2022, the federal government finally said, oh, we should look and see if anybody is following this law. And 100%, well, actually 0% of health plans were following the law. And then 100% of what they analyzed was a violation. But they have absolutely no teeth. Yeah. And to me, one of the reasons they have no teeth is back to your point on power. And so people like, I spent the last 15 years in nonprofit. Mm-hmm. Nonprofits have no power. Yep. They're not allowed to hire lobbyists, or they are, but they can be like, they have to pay people nothing and work for free and things like that. And so how do you change those laws and those rules to allow the nonprofits that are actually the ones out there working for climate change, working for mental health, to be able to lobby and also be people and have free speech and things like that? How do you get that changed?
So I think actually, I had to cut my slides, and one of my examples was a very, very dear friend of mine who, a professor at the University of Chicago. I will bring her here next year. She teaches leadership negotiation. She was here as an organizational behavior professor back in the 90s. Linda Ginzel was just here for 2 years. And she has a nonprofit called Kids in Danger because her 16-month-old baby toddler died from a defective crib. Defective meaning known to be dangerous, recalled already, but she didn't know. And there's no incentive for the manufacturers to actually try to look for those dangerous products. I mean, in cars, and they know they are, but in a children's product, no. So her organization is called Kids in Danger, and it's a nonprofit that actually does do advocacy. It's on the Consumer Protection Act, but I understand. They go and but I agree. I think it's a problem. I think having advocacy on behalf of the public. It's just, the problem that you have is a lot of nonprofits get corporate money, and they could be even for semi-good. So I put in front of my students, and I had in these slides, find the difference between an organization called Kids Safe and an organization called Kids in Danger. Kids in Danger, my friend's organization, it's a shoestring organization, really living on one woman and some interns, is fighting for product safety. Now, if you have product safety, you're fighting for standards for products, which basically are non-existent in this country because it's free market. You just develop a product, and if it kills some people, too bad. You pay them hush money, and it's gone. And Kids Safe is just subtly, very subtly implying that everything that happens to a child is your fault. They're going to teach you how to put the car seat in. They're going to teach you. They want kids safe. Everybody wants kids safe. The companies don't want kids to die. But they will have it such that you will never think it's the product. So that if something happens to your child from a Fisher-Price rocker or anything like that, where they marketed a product for sleep product that is known to be dangerous for sleeping babies, and then babies died from it, and then they had a recall of it, but babies died first, destroying families. But across the border in Canada, they said that's not a sleep product. They wouldn't sell it as a sleep product. You cannot leave a kid unattended in 30-degree angle. Tell your daughters and everybody. It was a rocker, and you left the kid, and the next thing you know, the kid suffocated from their head coming down. So I'm saying, we need prevention, an ounce of prevention. And we do need, I agree with you, it's a problem. I don't know, it's a mindset. So my thing is, that's why I go to education, because I think more people need to appreciate, the mechanics of creating good rules and the voices that need to be entered. So it's like advocating on, money in politics or something like that. It's very basic, but it's a starting point of other things working out, like rules on mental health. So if you don't have the infrastructure to make good rules, then you get bad rules and dragging feet and all of that. Mics, we need the power of the microphone.
This will be the last question.
Okay. And I'll be happy to stay, and I'm going back to my bunker, 11:30 Zoom call with Germany before he goes to sleep. I've been up since
I have
4.
the microphone here, so I think I've got it.
Oh, she's got it.
My name's Jan Pepper, MBA class of 1981, and I've been working in the renewable energy field for the last number of decades. Had a couple of questions for you. You talked about corporate influence in politics. So could you comment on the Citizens United and the ability that gives corporations to give money? And also, can you talk about the power of one? There's a movement for people to divest from banks that fund fossil fuel companies. Can you comment on whether you believe that is effective or not? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So Citizens United was just plain and simple a terrible decision. Okay, it was badly reasoned. It was, they were, I don't know in what universe these justices live to define corruption as, bags of money changing hands. There are 1,000 forms of corruption, excess corruption it's called, and it's legal in this country. So it's a very unfortunate decision, and that's what we have when people at very powerful positions in the Supreme Court make decisions of this sort. It's very sad. So it was a badly decided decision, and again, there are organizations I'm familiar with, nonprofits that work on political accountability and try to get more disclosures on political spending by corporations, because they are spending shareholders' money. Now, they might say, this is good for my shareholders to save taxes or avoid these regulations or whatever. Because, by the way, my friend tells me, and she even told my class at some point, that the reason the children are not children's products are not important is because a child's life is not worth much in the courts. So she said, if you kill a CEO, that's a lot of money because of potential. If you kill a child, then her husband in a deposition was asked, well, it was almost as if we did you the favor of killing this child. It was going to cost you all this money to send him through college. This was the attitude of the lawyers. Killing a child is nothing. It doesn't cost much. So then you can keep doing it as long as it's horrifying. But in any case, Divesting from banks. I mean, when Wells Fargo had the scandal on, this is when I became more interested in corporations and the rule of law, when they had the accounts opening scandal. The treasurer of the state of California wanted me to, wanted to do something about it. He's mad. Now, this guy Chiang was going to run for governor, and he had political reasons to want to show some strength against Wells Fargo, which everybody was angry with because it was accounts opening and everybody understood that fraud. So the fancy derivatives fraud, nobody understands. But accounts opening fraudulently, everybody understood that. So what is he going to do? Well, I realized in the conversation the treasurer of the state of California is a customer to Wells Fargo. He has no power. He needs a bank. So it's like, oh, how interesting. Treasurer of the state of California, Wells Fargo, customer. He's going to take the money out. He's going to issue bonds with some other bank. Like, they're all the same. So how is that helping? So once again, the banks are saying, and they will be told. I mean, Jamie Dimon is for sustainability and all, but his bank funds a lot of things because it's good business decisions. So once again, they're following the dictum, and they're told that's the dictum they should follow by all the Republican, governors and everything, and they'll kick them out if they don't do that. So it becomes very political. So, I mean, in the divestment, there's no, back in 10, 11 years ago, there was Occupy Wall Street. And some of these people were, reaching out to me. There was a guy who wrote a book called Leaderless Revolution or something like that. So it's like, okay, leaderless revolution. And they were going to start a bank, a good bank. And we do have an alum of this school who has a really good bank, beneficial bank. So if you look at, what's her name, Kat Taylor, she's got a bank. Her bank is like a microlender. It's a nonprofit bank. So it's owned by a nonprofit. And she came to a conference I organized called Finance and Society, only women speakers, by the way, in 2015. And she said the following, which you'll never hear from a bank CEO: I wonder what my depositors want me to do with the money. So she was wondering, she was saying that depositors are stakeholders. For Wells Fargo, he says, I have deposits and therefore I don't have debt. Like, he forgot he owes the money. So this is like, oh my God. You got my money, you owe me, but you forgot? Like, it's on the liability side? Anyway, so my point is, I told him also, the people who wanted to create a good bank, JP Morgan says going to eat your lunch. I mean, the problem is their power. They can buy you. They can offer better deals. They have infinite resources. JP Morgan Chase has $2.5 trillion of deposit. Don't know what to do with it. Go play anywhere. Do anything. But if you try to say something, then he'll say, oh, I won't make some loan, make the threats. So I think that these efforts at the margin are not getting at what the problem is. And I think we need to recognize what the problem is. There's excessive power to some institutions. They are working together with certain powerful people in the government, and it just becomes a sort of a symbiotic, corruptive dependencies that these people have. It's a very difficult problem, and it is overwhelming to think about how to deal with it. But, it is what it is. So I don't know that anybody taking their money out of one bank and then finding some other bank, maybe, if enough people do it. I mean, Beneficial Bank itself is trying to change the standards of banking, and they have like a whole crew of people trying to do that. And, I work with them, I talk to them, but I just don't think they're going to be successful enough at scale. The incentives are not enough there. So we need, I don't know. So first of all, we do need, public opinion matters. Reputation does matter. So some of these big shot people, I mean, we just have to take, rich and, important people and subject them to a little bit more scrutiny, because there's just too much buying of narratives and accepting what powerful people say in this world. So they get away with it. They get away with saying things and doing things. I've seen it's a lot. And we have to call out. So if we have the power to call out. So ideally you call out somebody from another sector so you don't lose your job, that kind of thing.